How's it going, guys? I got a York peppermint patty here. I kind of need the sugar. So we're gonna be doing a game review discussion, or something like that. Not sure how you would actually clarify it. It's basically you're discussing or talking about after you beat a certain game. As you can see in the background, I just finished Far Cry Primal. Oh, do I have some things to say. Now, for anyone who's never played a Far Cry game, kind of think of, like, in my personal opinion, a modern version of, like, an Elder Scrolls game. You know, Oblivion, Skyrim. It's got its stealth, it's got its combat. There are some features like modern technology happen to be one of them. You know, you're not using bows and arrows, you're using guns. You know, they can call reinforcements. You know, you can get attacked by helicopters, stuff like that. I own one of the Far Cry Primal games. I think it's the very first one. Tried playing it, did not like it whatsoever, especially because there was no saves or no checkpoints. There was only auto saves, so if you failed at the beginning, if you got to the end of the level and died, you would have to restart the entire level all over again. I do not like that when games do that. You know, I dealt with that crap when I was younger with the older games when there was no save feature. You know, they usually had like an auto checkpoint. You know, if you failed like Sonic or Mario or something like that, especially like the Sonic games, they have like a little flag. You know, hey, you got halfway the game, here's a checkpoint. You know, but if you fail to the end, you got to restart back over again. But at least you know what you were doing with. There was not really so much frustration. You know, you're a kid. You know, it was a new challenge to you and something like that. Far Cry, on the other hand, at least that version that I played, did not like. And then 2017 rolls by, and they were like, Far Cry Primal. And, you know, I might have done a trailer reaction to it, I don't remember. That was probably like one of the biggest games Ubisoft, you know, put out, in my personal opinion, besides like the Splinter Cell series. They're actually the first 3 Splinter Cell games. You know, and then after that, Ubisoft pretty much dropped the ball on almost every single game they made. And then Far Cry Primal comes around 2017. You know, they're sending you back 10,000 years, you know, as a caveman or not Neanderthal, however you want to put it. And it's like, yeah, this is awesome. You know, you get to explore this, you know, prehistoric European land. You know, you get to tame animals. There's different variety of animals you can come across, different ones you can fight. You know, you got like these 2 different tribes that are trying to wipe you out. You know, you're trying to survive. You know, there's different parts of the environment. You have grasslands, you have heavy forests, you got swamp, you got mountain. You know, it's just completely awesome. Never got to play it because at the time I started my old PC, so that was not running that game worth a shit. And then, like 3-4 months ago or somewhere around there, it went on sale. So I got it for like $8. I'm like, all right, you know, I finally got a gaming PC. I can actually run most of the games I want to play. Far Cry Primal is one of them. It was only like 6 or 7 gigabytes to download, so it wasn't really that much. You know, installed it, you know, started playing. I'm like, yeah, you know, this is pretty cool, you know. And as you slowly get into the further in game, you start to realize and start to see some of the nuances of, you know, what makes a game really good, what makes a game really bad, and what just makes a game just bland and boring. You know, playing Far Cry Primal is like, I was experiencing that. I was like, yeah, this is really cool. You know, they want you to take these bonfire camps, they want you to take these encampments and stuff like that. You know, you discover all these different locations, and hey, we throw some bonus stuff in there, like some cave paintings and these little artifacts you can find. It's like, it seemed like really cool. But over a while, once you get through about halfway through the game, it's the same stuff over and over and over. And eventually the point, you know, they have even a set population goal, you know, of like 300 people. You know, that's your maximum level. I maxed out my entire XP bar by 260. But the difference is with most people who do games like Far Cry Primal or games that are relative to that, they usually just stick to the main missions itself. They may make a video to, hey guys, you know, we're going to take a break from the main missions. We're going to go over to these side missions or these extra activities. No, me, I started doing all the activities. I went to every location you could enter, you know, or go to, and they were from like easy to medium to hard to very hard. I pretty much got them all knocked out up to the points of like hard difficulty and very hard, where these encampments were, you know, they have these bulky, you know, miniature bosses. With the level of technology I had at the moment, I just could not defeat these damn things. You know, I said, you know, screw it. We finally got pretty much almost the entire map covered. By that time, I was like at 150 something population, and then just started doing the missions after that. even with maxed out technology, the game is still relatively difficult, especially when you get into the hard difficulties and the very hard difficulties with encampments, because there are horn callers, so they can call for like reinforcements and stuff like that, and you may be like fighting an extra 8 to 12 people that are being called in on top of what you're already fighting. There's different sorts of animals you can tame. That's another thing that I was just slightly disappointed in the game with. Every single one of the animals you can tame are all predators. You had does, you had jaguars, you had leopards, you had saber cats, you had bears, you had wolves, but there's so much more animals in that game they should have allowed you to tame. Some of them at the time don't really make sense, like fish, for instance. Doesn't make a lot of sense because there's not too many areas where enemies' encampments were actually near water. There was a few, but not a lot. So fish, didn't really make sense. They did have like crocodiles in that game. That kind of made a little more sense. I'm like, cool, you can tame a crocodile. No, you can't. There's like maybe I want to say 20 different animals you can tame. And there's different varieties of them too, because some are stronger, some are weaker, some have stealth abilities, some can actually find items for you, and there's actually rare versions of them too. White wolves, black jaguars, black leopards. Then you come across the actual like elder beasts, basically miniature boss versions of these animals, of a bear, of a saber tooth, and a wolf, and they don't make those fights easy either. But you had like elk, you had deer. My personal favorite was like the honey badger, just because of the little chirpy sounds that they make. Hilarious. Dead goddamn giveaway too. What the hell is it? They had mammoths you couldn't tame, but you could ride them later on in the game. Woolly rhinos, you couldn't tame those either. You couldn't tame the crocodiles. There was like different birds in the game. There was like chickens, and there's like fowl, and there was like American bald eagles that were in that goddamn game. You couldn't tame any of those. So they pretty much just stuck to predatory animals you could actually tame, which is very disappointing. They had tall elk in there. And then they came across where they kind of mixed it up a bit. I'd be personally honest, I don't really watch too many Far Cry games. They just don't interest me. The last one I think I watched was with the Hispanic guy from Breaking Bad. He was the main boss villain. I think that was the last one I ever watched of a Far Cry game before they came out, Far Cry Primal. You could set traps, but they were made mostly for like the elder beasts. So they made the little arena that they had set to make it easier. For the boss on Sabretooth were actually relatively easy. For the bear and the Sabretooth were relatively easy to read, because with the Sabretooth you have help. The bear, he pretty much leads you into his own territory, so you have to be very careful. It was easier for me because I actually had the Sabretooth unlocked. It was the first one I went to unlock when it came to the Elder Beasts. The Elder Wolf, or the Wolf Pack, there was like 3 of them. That was probably the most pain in the ass one, because they would attack you and then they would run away. And then they would circle you, attack you, and then run away. And they had their own minions too, which made it even more goddamn annoying. Yeah, so you had like certain traps you could set to kind of weaken them or get them stuck. When it came to technologies, you had your spears, you had your clubs, you had your bows, you had forms of throwing knives. Each one of those ones went up to like a tier 3. It was the best you could get. So you had a short bow, you had a long bow, and you had a double bow. Then they had different versions of clubs and throwing knives like that, all the way up to the point where you would start getting like obsidian type of gear, obsidian arrowheads, obsidian like throwing knives like that. Some of the cool features was like the grappling hook. There were certain areas where certain cliff sides that you couldn't get to unless you had a grappling hook, or certain caves you couldn't explore because you needed a grappling hook. That's actually pretty smart. I think probably a little more advanced than not Neanderthal or caveman would have had, but it was a nice touch to the game. Bows were one of the biggest inventions from humanity that they made. It was a huge technological advancement. People were throwing spears and you had clubs, but the bow was the one that definitely made it a dead set whether you want to fight or not. Because unlike spears, you didn't really need the arm power as you do with a bow. You're pulling the string back, but since it's a lightweight velocity weapon that's coming towards you, It doesn't have that oomph that you need, or that running speed that you would need for spears. You could actually shoot further. You can tag enemies a lot more quieter, you know. So yeah, the bow made a huge, big advancement there. So some of my nitpicks that I have with this game, and there are two big ones. And if you're a big Far Cry pro gamer, you know, you're just a diehard fan of them, you may not like what I might say. Then again, you might not like Far Cry Primal either, because it's not set in modern day age technology. One of them is the climbing in that goddamn game. I hate the climbing. The game that I've ever played, out of all games where there are, you know, forms of RPGs, you know, forms of like simulator games or obstacle games, you know, mostly I just stick for like RPGs, you know, like the medieval type of era with the dragons and the knights and stuff like that. Dragon's Dogma has the best climbing of any game that I've ever played. It doesn't matter if it's a small cliffside, if it's a multi-story cliffside, you had to jump across a chasm and they would grab onto the ledge and you had to shimmy your way across. Dragon's Dogma overall has the best climbing of any game I've ever played, better than Skyrim. You know, Skyrim didn't have shit with the climbing game whatsoever. You had a horse. You know, the devs would not let you do that whatsoever. If you could shimmy your way up by crouching and just slowly jumping up a tall mountainside, you could do that. That was your form of climbing. Hell, Oblivion didn't even have that. Oblivion had a lot more stuff than Skyrim did when it came to athletics. But yeah, it's like he could barely climb small little boulders, which should be relatively possible to do, and he would just slide right off. You know, don't even think about trying to climb a miniature waterfall that has, you can see the stones where they're set, where you could be able to just, hey, if I jump on the stone, I jump on the stone, you know, he can climb up top. Not happening whatsoever. Same thing with some form of grappling areas too. There's certain areas that, like, hey, there's a grappling hook here, you know, or a grappling attachment here, you throw you there, but we're going to give you very little space to swing so you can get to that part. And there was one of the missions that was in there, Mike York patty's melting here. There was water, and there was like a cliff, and then there was a grappling hook attachment, and then there was you back here, so you could, but you had to go around this way, and there was like a wall that was like right there, so there was not enough space for you to swing, so you literally had to just time it when you grabbed onto it to swing around, and hopefully you hit it. It took me like 5 tries. It started irritating the hell out of me. But yeah, climbing was one of the biggest things I did not like about that game whatsoever. You could not climb terrain to save your goddamn life. You know, I think that's probably the reason why they put the grappling hook in there, because the way they designed the map, especially when you get into the Udam territory, where it's literally nothing but mountain terrain. You know, you need the grappling hook in a lot of those areas. You know, really get annoying. Now, the Azalea, on the other hand, they're a little more annoying because they're more technologically advanced than the rest of you, or whether your tribe or the Udam. They're very highly pyromaniacs, so if you don't have good fire resistance or items that are going to reduce your fire damage, you will struggle against them. I took them out first, and I looked up on Reddit, I looked up on Google, and they all said, you know what, go for Udam first because they're going to be a lot more easier. The Azalea are a lot more technologically advanced. You're going to struggle a lot more harder against them. I found them to be a pain in the ass, but not to the point where it was like, you know, I'm really struggling against these guys, I just can't beat them. I'm going to put my candy down here. You know, they're like an annoying mosquito that's right by your ear. You can hear the buzzing, you're swiping around, and eventually you would get to them. That was the Azalea. They usually use a lot of like fire bombs. They would occasionally come in with a spear, but they were mostly just clubs. They would have bulky dudes that have clubs on fire who would do a lot of goddamn damage to you. Just like the Udam, they're also ones who would actually capture predators too. So if you had your owl, you could actually release them. The owl is another feature that I like in this game. It's one of the first animals you ever get to tame, but it's kind of like more of a side effect attack than really an actual feature you really get to use, because the owl is kind of like your drone in a sense. You could just scope the entire land, you can see how many enemies you come across. If you advance the owl's technology far enough, he can actually dive bomb enemies, he can carry beehive bombs, fire bombs, berserker bombs, you know, or explosives, however YouTube wants to mark that. onto your enemies and stuff like that. So that was actually really cool. At first, I was like in the beginning of the game, I was like maybe 25% into the game, like, yeah, you know, I'm not really using the owl. I don't really see the point to it. But the further you get into the game, the more you start to struggle against a lot of goddamn enemies and a lot of encampments, you know, especially when they have swarms of enemies. It makes a lot more sense to use the owl because they don't react as you actually physically attacking them. However, when you start dropping your ordnance onto them, that's when they start getting a little suspicious and they start opening their, you know, visionary area of, okay, this is where this attack started, this is where they have to be, and they'll actually go out of their encampments and start searching within that area. Stealth is somewhat of a thing, not somewhat of a thing. It's not like Splinter Cell where you hide in the dark and they can't see you, or, you know, Skyrim or Oblivion, they'll be like, hey, someone shot me with an arrow, but there's no one here. I'll go back to doing my thing. Not happening. If they spot you, they spot you, and they will swarm on you like a goddamn thing of hornets. So forget about using environmental terrain to your advantage. Well, sort of. Like, use stuff like a ghillie suit or hiding behind a tree. Hiding behind a tree will somewhat help, but if you truly think you're going to hide in the bushes and pick them off with a goddamn bow, not happening whatsoever. One of the biggest advantages I found is using guerrilla tactics, setting their little huts on fire so that it starts panicking fear, and then you start shooting them with arrows, or you start sending your beasts into them. That was probably one of the biggest things I had to do when taking on the very hard encampments, because even then they would still call them reinforcements, but if you could set the terrain on fire, it helped out a lot, because a lot of them don't have fire resistance. Azalea probably have higher fire resistance, but not to the point where they are immune to it. Udam were just goddamn easy to deal with, because Azalea are pyromanics, technological, I guess, Aztec-esque, you know, Mayan-esque type of enemies. The Udam are basically just barbarians who are cannibals at the same damn time. But yeah, the owl made a huge difference. Now, when it comes to fighting the Udam, like I said, they're really bulky, but they're also really stupid. One thing as I noticed is that your enemies don't really use animals like you do. They can't tame beasts, so they just end up caging them. So you can use that as like a advantage. But the Udam, you know, like I said, they're relatively easy. They're mostly just more health than anything else. Now, when it comes to the actual boss fights themselves, Batari and Ul. Ul is the leader of the Udam, Batari is the leader of the Azalea. Both of them were trash. They are some of the sloppiest, poor design boss fights that I've ever played in any of my games of a boss fight. So there's games where you play where the boss is like, has a lot of health, has a, think like Dark Souls or Elden Ring, where, they have certain designs, certain attacks, they have a certain amount of set of health. Hey, this is going to go into a phase 2. You can use these pillars, or you can use these spikes, or use a certain item and it'll weaken them down or reduce their damage. Far Cry Primal has nothing like that. The two main boss fights were just complete trash. There was no environmental effects whatsoever. With fighting Batari, she is basically, when you enter her arena, there's a door here, there's a big ass fire pillar here, there's a bunch of sconces that are in her little area, there's a cliffside, and that's it. You're literally getting into a arrow fight with her, or a spear fight. Owls will not attack bosses, so you can use your ordnance, but it's not going to do shit against her anyways. So they pretty much give these bosses a lot of goddamn health and one of the most blandest, boring fights ever. And eventually Batari, once her health drops low enough, she'll actually come down from her little throne and actually attack you. Bosses will call in reinforcements too, so that can make that kind of annoying. I don't want to go over 20 minutes, so might just break into 2 parts. What are we looking at here? Ooh. We're gonna break this into 2 parts, because I don't want to have to make this like a 20-something minute video and then my long it takes. So we'll be right back for part 2.